I think not too surprised, to be honest, by the severity of this rhetorical response from Beijing. I mean, the temperature has been rising for a while between the Five Eyes and China on a number of issues, including, in particular, on Hong Kong. And I mean, when it comes to Hong Kong, we go back to May and the announcement by Beijing that they would pass a national security law for Hong Kong. And that met with a fairly strong Five Eyes response at the time. And as the months have worn on, I think that the gap between those sides has just grown. The sort of rhetoric has increased. This sort of seems to be the latest, phase in that process of a greater sense of opposition between the Five Eyes and Beijing on questions to do with Hong Kong.
Well, what impact will China's latest rhetoric and threats have on the Five Eyes? What are the UK, the US, Australia, New Zealand and Canada making of it?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, the rhetoric from both sides will not have much of an effect on the other, apart perhaps from to harden their positions. I mean, I think the criticism of Beijing by the Five Eyes is not going to do what the Five Eyes say they want, which in this case is a reconsideration of the decision to disqualify legislators. I think, Beijing's sort of harsh rhetoric telling the Five Eyes to butt out is not going to lead them to butt out either. I think the Five Eyes are going to continue to pay close attention to what goes on in Hong Kong and probably continue to speak up. And of course, all of this is in the context of a wider, difficult relationship between the US and China in particular, but one that's spread to those other members of the Five Eyes over the last year.
Well, a Chinese diplomat in Canberra this week reeled off a long list of grievances in a fresh attack on Australia. But is there anything new to be learnt here?
I'm not sure there's a lot of new things to be learnt about those specific issues. I guess what's new in that list is the way that they've been brought together and the way that they appear to have been presented, as a bit of a threat towards Australia to try to sort of get Australia to change its China policy. I mean, it seems from the Australian government's response that there's not much chance of that either at the moment. So I think both sides are digging their heels in. We're going to have continued difficult, tense relations for some time to come. It's hard to see how this is going to be de-escalated just at the moment.
And do you think Australia is being singled out by China? Which countries are going through a similar thing when it comes to dealing with Beijing?
Well, perhaps Australia's had it a little bit worse than some of the other Five Eyes, but I'm not sure it's been singled out. I mean, Canada's had quite a lot of criticism from China over the last couple of years, really since the arrest of Meng Wanzhou, the Huawei executive. And of course, that was followed by Beijing's detention of two Canadians in Beijing. The US and China, of course, have been at each other's throat while now, and the rhetoric's been pretty harsh on both sides. So I think in those three cases, the relations are not in great shape. Perhaps the UK and New Zealand have been somewhat less in the firing line recently, although when it comes to Hong Kong issues, the UK's spoken up very strongly on a number of occasions, and I think the Chinese response there has been hardening over time. There's also with the UK the Huawei 5G issue that came to a head in the summer when London sort of reversed its decision on allowing Huawei to be part of the UK's 5G network. So there's, I think, plenty of reasons to expect that UK-China relations will continue to be very difficult.
And as you say, China's not likely to reverse its course when it comes to Hong Kong. What avenues are left for other countries to act on their concerns about the human rights situation there?
Yeah, and I think China's not likely to change its course because these are issues which are pretty fundamental to its approach to Hong Kong. Issues which it sees these as issues of national security, people going to Washington and calling for sanctions on Hong Kong and China and so on. So I think these are pretty sensitive fundamental issues, and they're not going to change their policy on this at all. I think when it comes to that sort of thing, it's difficult for other governments to have much influence on Beijing, to be honest. And we've now gone in a sort of rather unhealthy spiral where things just seem to be getting worse. perhaps, at some time in the past, there might have been more scope to have some dialogue and discussion and find some points of common ground as well as points of difference. But that seems to be rather difficult at the moment.
As you say, things are getting worse. Last week, we saw the dramatic resignation of opposition lawmakers from Hong Kong's legislature. Was this a wrong move, in your view? How can their voices be heard now?
Well, I think it was a political choice for the 15 to decide to resign, sort of in sympathy with the 4 who were expelled from the legislature. I mean, there's arguments on both sides. Had they stayed in, their voices would have been there in legislative debates. But I think politically they felt that it was time to take a position. Perhaps bluffs were called and people weren't quite expecting things to turn out in this way. I think outside the legislature in Hong Kong, I think there still is a reasonable amount of debate. I mean, we can read in the Hong Kong media every day reports of what's been happening, and many of these politicians are still appearing on our television screens in the evening and appearing online. So I think we do still have some debate and discussion here in Hong Kong that hasn't been closed off completely. Looking forward, I think the key question, it's difficult to predict at the moment what will happen in September next year when the delayed legislative elections are due. And we'll see whether they go ahead as planned, see whether opposition legislators decide to stand or boycott, and see whether Beijing tries to disqualify any.
And finally, what does this all mean for democracy in Hong Kong and the fight of many activists? Can they effectively carry on for now?
I mean, I think the prospects for any progress towards democracy in Hong Kong are very bleak at the moment. That's been the case really since the Occupy movement back in 2014. I mean, that really brought things to a stalemate. And since then, again, it's been a process of greater polarization. Positions have hardened. I mean, to make progress towards democracy, there needs to be some sort of compromise and a consensus building. There need to be some more moderate voices. They're not around in Hong Kong politics at the moment. These are sensitive issues on all sides. As we've seen, they're sensitive issues for Beijing. So I don't see much prospect of progress on the institutional front towards greater democracy.
Dr. Tim Summers, thank you so much.